right, we are going to start. And for the people who aren't in here, they're just going to lose out. So we'll give you the secrets right at the front, and then you can say, we have the secrets. And the secret is, we have no idea what we're talking about. But having established that fact, this is a title is a translation from the original, because it talks about the devil, right? So what the hell are we supposed to do about it is the, and the American got that. So what do you, okay guys, you're saying it's not autism, it's not this, it's not that, then, but what are we supposed to do about these behaviors because they're driving us nuts, right? And that's really, really reasonable. And of course the behaviors are so complex, it's very difficult to be able to tell you exactly what to do, even in the consultations. You know, we're sitting there, you might have 5 of us up there in a consultation, we're scratching our heads. I don't know, that sounds really weird. Must be autistic. No, we're not going there. So we're not entirely sure, but we have some pretty good ideas. And the one thing we are absolutely convinced about is that the behavior is not random. The behavior is not meaningless. All behavior has a purpose. People do it for a reason. Sometimes it's obnoxious, but they do it for a reason. So if I sit up here and I scratch my head, there was an itch, right? It's kind of meaningless behavior. If I pick my nose, it's because I'm obnoxious, right? You don't do that in public. But our kids don't have filters, so they're not sitting there worried if I behave this way, people are going to think this about me. They're not thinking about that at all. They're just being who they are, which actually is one of the most wonderful things about them. That's why I love it, even when they're in this room, you know, running around and whatever they're doing. It's just wonderful because they don't care what anybody thinks about it. It's kind of like being a really old person, because I'm almost a really old person, and I really care less about what people think than I used to. And I used to think a lot about what people thought. Now it's just a little bit of what people think because, man, I'm all right. My mother was wonderful that way, and David's mother too, from what I know about her. Didn't care at all what people thought. They're just going to be themselves. And that's our kids, and it's wonderful. All right, speaking of David, he and I were working on a training module on behavior for the National Center for Deafblindness in the United States. And he had one of these brainstorms when he kind of put this thing together, which is a urgency of need for intervention kind of scale. And it's really helped me a lot in terms of when I'm talking with people, you know, and they say, well, my kid's doing this behavior, and we think, well, so is that such a terrible thing? And it may be, but that's why we have the hierarchy. So the first level of the hierarchy is this a behavior that just bugs you personally? But then you can just accept and ignore it. You know, those of you who have been married for a while, you've been doing this a long time, right? I really wish he or she would stop doing that, but okay, that's who they are. They're just going to do it. You know, 31 years with Nancy, and oh my God, it's like, but I just accept and ignore, right? But yes, other than self-disclose it to an entire audience, but yeah. But there are lots of things that our kids do which are obviously very weird. But so, you know, that Jacob does these things with his fingers, which I cannot possibly do. There's some kind of combination there, I'm sure, all right, that's really strange, but I don't mind. Level 2 is when you can see that the behavior has some real function for the child. It seems to help them. And so because it seems to help them, I can accept it or ignore it. And I might put the shaking of the hands in front of it. I wish my kid wouldn't do that. Or there was a mother years ago now who said to me, her daughter was sitting and rocking. She said, if she could just stop doing the rocking, she would seem normal. And I was thinking, but she's unlikely to stop the rocking, and can't you just ignore that and accept that? The third one Is this a behavior that seems to help the child to function in a positive way, but should be reduced or replaced by another better behavior over time? Jacob will take his spoon and stick it up into the bottom of his eye. That drives me nuts. It doesn't seem to ever have hurt him as far as I can tell, but I'd like to stop that one. Okay, that's on my list. We'll look at a list in a minute and see what y'all think. Is this a behavior that's undesirable and needs to be reduced or replaced fairly quickly? Some of them may take a while. I thought when Jacob would smear his feces that was a really bad one I like to get rid of. It did take about 16 years to get rid of it, but we did. But, it's not life or death situation for him at least. It might be for the rest of us, but it worked out okay for him. And then finally, is this a behavior that needs to be prevented immediately? And there's certainly behaviors that fall under that category. The thing is, you can debate what some of these are based on your own personal idiosyncrasies. So, for example, Jane bangs her head against the side of the bathtub while taking a bath. Okay, we're going to do a poll here. How many of you think that's a number 1? Number 2? Number 3? Maybe. Number 4? Number 5? Yeah, I'm a number 5 on that, but they're about equal number 4s, and there's at least one number 3. That depends on lots of situations. For example, how hard was the banging would be something that would be a concern to me. What was the reaction to the banging? Jacob tried that a couple of times, and he would laugh, which is, of course, a typical charge reaction to pain, right, is they laugh. But I didn't want that one, so we did stop that right away, thank goodness. Okay, Alan flaps his arms and hands wildly when he's excited. Number 1, number 2, number 3, I think we could stop. Most people said 1. Megan sticks her hands in her food at some meals. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Okay, we got 1s, 2s, and 3s. You guys, 1s are very tolerant here. I don't like that one at all. It's gross. We can do one more here. Pick one out of the... Oh, we'll just do the Tim one. These were all based on my students, by the way, and myself. Tim will drop to the ground sometimes when he went out on walks or excursions. Just drops to the floor. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Okay, I didn't see any 5s, but I saw all of the others. And that's just so interesting. There's not a right answer here, but it's interesting to think for ourselves, with this behavior, how much of a concern do I feel about that behavior? And then how much of a concern ought I to feel about that behavior? And again, no right answer, but what we do in response is going to be communicating something to our child about our attitude towards it. So this is a session on interventions. So I'll just list them here that we're going to be discussing. One is about pain, which I'll say something about, but we're not spending as much time on pain as it deserves. So I'll just say that for now. Figuring out why the kid's doing what they're doing. Why would that work for my kid? David talked before about putting yourself in the body of the child. And actually, I do that psychologically. I think, if I were that child, given their situation, would I ever behave that way? And that's very helpful to me to kind of get a sense of what might be going on. Co-regulation. We've talked briefly about self-regulation. This is co-regulation. Yoga or Tai Chi. Sensory breaks. Calendar systems. Social stories. Experience books. The importance of respecting communication. Managing transitions, and adapting the environment. So let me say something about pain. I asked the U.S. Facebook group, it's got it's not just U.S., lots of you may be on it as well, about 7,000 members right now. I just asked, many of you have pictures of your kids in pain, and by the next day I had about 80 pictures, most of them hospital-based. Our kids are experts on pain. they experience loads of it. But the thing is, they've learned to tolerate it. You know, as you get older, one of the things I've noticed is, I know I experience pain here and there, but I tend to just ignore it. It's just a factor of life, and I just go on. Unless the pain or additional pain becomes so extreme, then I lose behavioral control, right? Then I become a mess. Whiny, sick, sad person. And I think it's for our kids too. They go along managing their pain, but the pain suddenly becomes so extreme that suddenly their behaviors become aggressive, or they become self-injurious, but certainly extreme. Because, oh my gosh, why are they acting that way? Always, always, always check out pain first. It's just absolutely essential that you do that. When Jacob was, well, this is probably 10, 12 years ago, and he stopped sleeping, right? He always had trouble going to sleep, right? But it would take him a half hour, 45 minutes. It took 2 hours, right? That's unusual. Then it took 3 hours. So Nancy took him to the doctor. The doctor checks Jacob all out, right? A little bit of wax in his ear, but everything seems fine. Sends him home. Sleep gets worse. He doesn't sleep at all. The doctor says, we should start some psychotropic medication that will help relax him and reduce his anxiety and help him sleep. And I'm going, no way in heck am I going to do that, because there's something wrong here, and I want to find out what's something wrong. She took him back to the doctor. The doctor looked him all over, looked in the ear. Oh, that's not wax. That's some kind of foreign object that's embedded in his ear canal. Should see the ENT to have that removed. Well, it was between Christmas and New Year's, and so the ENT was not available, on vacation, et cetera, et cetera. So Nancy took him, I went with her to the emergency room, and we held him down, and the emergency room doctor pulled out this object, which no one knows what it was, but it was embedded, it was infected, and when he lay down, it rubbed against his eardrum. So extremely painful. He didn't cry. He would just lie down for 10 minutes and then get up. Lie down for 10 minutes and get up, no matter what I did to help him. Always check out pain first, because once that's removed, normal sleeping returned. All right. Not just check out pain first, but understand behavior first. And David's going to talk. We'll go back and forth, back and forth.
Don't clap. You can save it. Save it. He needs the clapping. He really does. I want to go back a couple of slides, which is very dangerous. Yes, Tim showed this list and he talked about some of them, and we had to give them a number. And that's about choices, and it's about priorities. And a long time ago, a mother of a child with charge said to me, charge syndrome is always about choices and priorities. You always have to think about priorities. What's the most important thing at the moment? What's the most important thing today? And then suddenly, something more important comes, and that's the top priority. And she said it's exhausting because you always have to be thinking, what must we pay attention to and what can we ignore? And you feel guilty about ignoring things, and you feel guilty if your top priority suddenly isn't the top priority and it should be something different. And I think that exercise we did, it just typifies that issue of trying to decide which are the most important things. And charge is so complicated that those problems are built into the syndrome. Now I have to remember where we were. So, the behaviors that charged children do, many of them are behaviors they do all by themselves, without other people. And in English, we call those behaviors self-stimulation. Things like flapping the hands, clicking the tongue, grinding the teeth together, weaving the head, spinning, all those kinds of behaviors we call self-stimulation. And in my job, I was always an advisory teacher, so I didn't have a classroom. I traveled around, and I went to other people's schools. And again with children with charge syndrome, when I arrive at the school and I meet the teacher very often would say, "We would like you to help us stop this child doing hand flapping, doing the spinning, doing the rocking, doing the teeth grinding." They always wanted to stop things. And they didn't very often talk about beginning things because they were more interested in stopping things. And my response, they would say, "How can we stop this behavior?" And I always say, "What does it mean? What does this behavior mean?" And so often the teacher would look at me as if I was crazy. This isn't something with a meaning. This is something we have to stop. And I would work very hard to help them understand that first we have to find out what the behavior means. Why is the child doing the behavior? Then we're in a good position to say, how can we try to stop the behavior? And sometimes when you understand the behavior, you don't want to stop it, as Tim said, because the behavior is actually helping the child a lot. And things like rocking and spinning and hand flapping, it's not that difficult to observe a child and see the benefit they get from the behavior. If you know how to observe and what to look for, you can usually see the benefits of the behavior very, very often in many cases. So it's about what behaviors mean and where they come from, what causes them. Then it's about priorities, deciding whether you want to work on this behavior or whether you can leave it for now. You may want to remove it, but it's not urgent. You can do it at some other point. Then when you start to think about strategies, interventions, things you can do, you can be completely immoral in the way you shop around for strategies. People think there are autism strategies. The classic is picture exchange. You've probably heard of picture exchange, where the child uses little pictures or symbols to communicate, maybe because they don't have speech or they don't have language in sign language. And picture exchange became very popular in the field of autism. But we were using it in the field of deafblindness 35, 40, 45 years ago. And when I recommend picture exchange for a child with charge syndrome, occasionally people say, "Oh, do you think she's autistic?" Because they think you only do picture exchange if the child is autistic. There's this crazy idea that some strategies are just for deafblind, some are just for charge, some are just for autism, some are just for children who are bipolar. And it isn't like that at all. You use what seems to be a good idea for the child on the basis of your assessment of their needs. And you can take strategies from anywhere. The world of blindness offers us many, many great educational strategies, even if a child with charge has a lot of vision and it's useful vision. The world of deafness has great strategies, and all those other specialist worlds can offer things. And we may have to adapt the strategy. We should adapt the strategy because it has to be individualized for your child. So you get the idea, and then you have to think, how can we do this with him to make it effective or to make him interested or to help it to work? So don't get too fixed on we can't do that because it's for blind children, or we can't do that because it's for autistic children. Nothing is just for one kind of child, in my opinion. And I, as I say, I'm totally immoral. If I come to a conference like this and I see you and your child doing something, and it looks good. I go back to California and tell people it's a good idea. A classic is walking poles, which you call Nordic poles. We were at a charge conference in the United States, and there was a geneticist there who was a parent, and her son was an adult, and he was walking around with walking poles. And we all said, wow, what a great idea for people with charge syndrome. We'd never heard of it. And now we see children from the age of sometimes as young as 5 using walking poles very effectively. When I was in Germany last year, I went to stay with Julia in Heidelberg, and we went for a walk in the hills the next day, and Julia had bought walking poles for Lavinia. She'd never seen them, and I said, does she like them? And Julia said, well, you're the expert, you're going to get her to use them. And I remember thinking, this is how I pay for staying at the house for a few days. We got off the bus and we went to the woods, and I showed the poles to Lavinia. I demonstrated how they work. She took them, and normally she walks holding another person, especially when the ground is not flat. And when she holds the other person, she leans, and she goes lower and lower. It's very bad for her back, and it's very bad for the other person. She took the poles and she walked for 2 hours, completely independently. And then she said, I'm tired of these. And she gave them to me, and she caught hold of someone and did her usual. Those kind of ideas can come from anywhere. And it's important not to start saying, oh, walking poles are only for people who can walk 20 kilometers, or they're only for adults, or they're only for teenagers. You've got to be much more creative. I talked 2 years ago about posture and movement, which is my obsession in charge. The children give us so much information by the things they do with their bodies. And we need to pay attention, and we need to learn, because these are major gifts to us when we are trying to assess and educate the children. And of course, this boy is watching a cartoon film on television. Gravity is a big problem because he has charge syndrome and significant vestibular problems and many other difficulties. He's found a way to stop gravity being a problem and make it a positive thing. He hangs in this position, gravity pulls him so his head can't move, and then his eyes can watch the television. No problem. We wouldn't want the boy in this position for long, long periods of time, but for 5 minutes to watch the television, this works. So I would say this isn't a number 5, it's not a number 4, it's not even a number 3 probably. It's a number 2 at the moment, but maybe it's a number 3, and we need to talk to the physical therapist about ideas to increase the muscle tone and get the boy to resist gravity more effectively, swimming, horse riding, and all those ideas. And I now have a collection of 250 photographs of children with charge. Many of them are German. When I was here two years ago, I got back to California, and within a day, I think Claudia sent me 4 wonderful photographs of her son, Jonas, in the most extraordinary position, hanging backwards, upside down over the back of the couch, with his elbows up above his head, and his legs and feet completely wound. He's totally relaxed, and he's playing with his tablet. And it's so important to say, what does this mean? Not sit up properly. Sit on the couch, put your feet on the floor. That isn't a helpful response. You may want him to sit on the couch with his feet on the floor, but that might be in the future, next week, next year, when he's 21, or maybe never. And And I think often the children take these strange positions because they want to use their eyes, they want to use vision, and they fix their body to fix the head, to fix the eyes, so that they can use their eyes effectively. And we see that again and again. The other function of these behaviors usually is self-regulation. The children look for pressure. They like deep pressure, which calms them down. They stand on their head, they squeeze into a tight space, they wind their body, they take a piece of string and they wind it very, very tight. They find a hat and they pull it down and down and down till it's very, very tight on their head. And those behaviors are probably part of the way they help to keep themselves calm, because they don't self-regulate well because they have charge syndrome. So it's really important to look at the children with those ideas in your mind, rather than either, oh, this behavior is really strange, and laugh and not learn anything from it. Even worse is to look at the behavior and say, stop doing that. It looks strange, so I want you to stop. Not a good approach. You have to observe, and then you have to think. And I always say, I'm a teacher, so I can be very critical of teachers. I never criticize psychologists because I'm not a psychologist. But, you know, it's hard sometimes to get teachers to think outside their usual area of thinking. And children with charge take all of us outside our normal area of thinking, and they take us to charge land. And there you have to fit in with the rules in charge land. And you're all in the process of still learning that, and you will go on learning that the rules are different there. But the rules are very logical, just as logical. So now I'll hand on to Tim, and I'll be back later.
I like this group. And David kind of threw in the idea of self-regulation, and I'm going to talk about that briefly. But you know how many teachers will complain about our children with charge because they sit at their desk doing this? And what they don't know is if you want your child with charge to attend to what you're doing, that's what they need to do. Because of the vestibular problems, the eyes aren't focusing properly and the head's not staying still. The only way they can really concentrate on what's going on in the classroom is to make sure their head is steady. So they're doing this looking like they're horribly lazy, but they're not. They're attending. And when you tell them, stop doing that, you know, sit up and pay attention, you're creating difficulty for that child to be able to function. And then what's going to follow is misbehavior. So the children are constantly trying to regulate themselves. We self-regulate to help ourselves achieve goals, things we want to be able to do. If you've got a test coming up, I like academic examples since I'm an academic. You got a test coming up, you know it's on Monday and now it's Friday. And you say, well, I got the whole weekend to study. But you still have to remind yourself and think about, I've got to be motivated. I've got to think about how I'm going to find the time to actually sit down and study. That's part of self-regulation, when you make yourself motivated to be able to do that. You have to control your emotions. If you become too anxious, it's going to be very hard to study. If you're not anxious at all, you'll probably go out and have fun instead of studying at all. I got to make sure my emotions are well controlled, well regulated. You've got to make sure that that your behavior actually follows your intentions, and that I actually get myself to walk over to where my book is and sit down and open the book and study. I've got to keep my body organized so I have enough sleep and I eat and make sure that I'm comfortable so that I can study for the test and actually succeed on the test. We all do these things. We think, we behave, we have emotions, and we deal with our body. This is something that happens to children normally as they develop. They have role models that they observe. They discover the consequences of their not regulating themselves. But for our kids with Charge syndrome, this does not happen so naturally. They don't learn by observing others. They learn by direct experience. And then they don't know, what am I supposed to do to manage these things? When my emotions are way off, what do I do to bring them back down? When my thoughts keep running through my head and stuck on some kind of idea, how do I get myself unstuck and move on? So all of these things are difficult, which means that we have to provide the support to our children to learn how to regulate. It's going to come from our co-regulating with them. Let's see what I wrote here, make sure. Oh, I'm not going to look at that one. Yeah. There's a small version and there's the large version. And with my eyes, the large version really helps. So to think about how you're going to co-regulate with your child, think about how you do it. How do you manage your thoughts and motivation? How do you manage your feelings and emotions? How do you manage your actions and behaviors? And how do you keep your physical state organized? Now, I know how you keep your physical state organized because I can observe it. You know, many of you squirm around in your chair. Some of you will do kind of stretching movements. Some of you will yawn, which is actually pretty effective. Some of you will scratch your head or wipe your face. These are all nice ways to keep yourself attuned. And I know, having sat through myself through some of these longer presentations, how hard I had to work at that. But then what do you do with your feelings when you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so discouraged because I worry so much about my child with Charge. I'm hearing things which make me even more worried, but I can't get so down. I got to keep myself up enough that I'll still attend. So all these things you're doing, you are self-regulating constantly. So think about what you do and how can you do that with your child to help them do the same thing. I'll give you one example. It was a brilliant example at a conference we were all at in Perth, Australia. And I was talking about self-regulation. A parent raised her hand and said, you know, my daughter comes home from school. I can tell that she's had enough. You know, one more little thing will knock her over the edge. She has had everything that she can tolerate. She's at her limit. And then she said, well, what do I do when I'm like that? And she said, well, I know what I do. Have a cup of tea. That's the British thing, right? Everything is solved by a cup of tea. And I sit on the couch, I listen to music, I lower the lights, and get a cuddle if I can. So that's what she did with her daughter. She got off the school bus or whatever and come on the house, lower the lights, put on some music, get a cup of tea, and cuddle. And her daughter's emotions went right down. Your daughter couldn't maybe figured out that way to do it. Our kids find often severe behavioral ways to do it. I get my emotions down by charging around the house and knocking over furniture. That's not the way we want them to regulate themselves. But all the behavior that they engage in, and if you think about this, it is all self-regulation. The flapping of the arms, self-regulation. The banging of the head, self-regulation. So if we're going to take behaviors away from them, we've got to teach them the ways to self-regulate. So this just kind of summarizes what I've said. Because self-regulation skills are hard for children with significant disabilities to develop, we provide the external support for what will become their internal regulatory process. And for those of you who don't know Norwegian or even Danish would work, and I used to know Danish, I was nearly fluent, and then I left it. But so regulating at the top, and then the bottom arrow is development. So over the course of development, how am I learning to regulate? And it says from outer to inner regulating. So at the beginning with the tubes, the other person is providing so much of the regulation as the person inside is developing their own regulatory skills, and then we can pull back as adults. So it's just an illustration that my friend Jude Nicholas from Norway had put together for me. And my students actually, I think, did a translation, but I like the original. So at this point, I'm going to bring Shanti up to talk about some of the other strategies here.
Hello. I'm going to start by talking about Funchi. Funchi is an adaptive form of Tai Chi. a form of martial arts, and use of deep breathing. It was developed by Sharon Berry Grassick from Perth, Australia. And it's adaptive in the way that it uses different stories almost to help children and adults even to get involved in the Funchi and get used to the movements. The one that comes to mind for me is one's about going to the beach. And one of the movements is about scooping ice cream and how your arms are moving. It's all told with the story. So it makes it engaging and fun. There are lots of really positive benefits that we've found for many individuals, but particularly individuals with charge, in engaging in this Funchi. One is that it reduces anxiety and stress, because a lot of it is about deep breathing and focusing energy and focusing your thoughts on what you're doing. Another is that it decreases depression or sadness, so it kind of increases some of your happier energy and gets you more excited. Another really positive benefit for our individuals with charge is that it helps improve balance. It helps get the individual thinking about their body, improving their body awareness. Where is my head right now? Where are my arms right now? What are my legs doing? And help them practice that balance. So overall, it's a really engaging activity. We have had a couple students from Tim's lab work with individuals with charge to see how it helps them either improve sleep or their balance. And also Shelby Munn, who's a student, she's been here at the conference. She has a poster out in the hallway on it and would love to talk to you more about it. She's going to be taking it into a classroom of all different kinds of students, not necessarily all with charge, to see how it helps them attend and pay attention better to a lesson. And she'd love to talk to you more about that, or if you have more questions, definitely ask Tim about that as well. The next intervention we'd like to talk about is sensory breaks. Sensory break is a period of time that you take, or a break that you take from a particular activity that the individual was working on before. So whether that be a break from a lesson at school, or just a time at home when you break from whatever activity the family was engaging in, to have some time with this sensory break. When we say the word break, sometimes people think it means a rest, but that's not necessarily the case. It's really important to view sensory breaks as being individualized for each person. That individual may need a rest. They may need some time to get away from sensory input, to just relax, maybe have the lights off or something like that. Other individuals may need more sensory input. They may need to run around and get some energy out. They may need to have more brighter or flashing lights. So it's really important to note that it isn't necessarily a rest period, but it's a period for them to help regulate their sensory inputs and take a break from the activity they were doing to help get them back centered, focus, and ready to go back to the activity they were doing. I'd like to read this image we have on the right. It's one we like to use often, but I know it wasn't translated, so I want to read that very quick. At the very top, it says, meltdown versus tantrum. And then below it, it says, looking for a reaction, communicating what they need or want, aware of their own safety, in control of their behavior, able to calm down once the situation is resolved. So all of those kind of categories. On the tantrum side, it's checked off. So they're aware of their own safety, they're in control of their behavior, and once the situation is controlled, they'll calm down. For meltdown, however, none of those are checked. Because when a meltdown is happening, when there's too much sensory overload, when there's too much going on, and the child is engaging in a meltdown, they don't necessarily understand how safe they're being. They don't have control of their behavior. And even once the situation is controlled or they get what they need or want, it may still be happening. And our individuals and children with charge are already functioning at a very high level. They have a lot going on, whether that be chronic pain, whether that be difficulties with multisensory impairment, sensory overload or underload, boredom. There's just a lot that they're dealing with. And so many of those situations could lead to a meltdown and indicate perhaps a need for a sensory break. In this case, sensory breaks can be really helpful, but you have to structure and create a way for the individual to communicate that that's what they want before it gets to a meltdown or before it gets to disruptive or aggressive behavior that might be harmful to themselves or others. So structuring a way or reading their behavior to see when are they communicating that they may need a break from whatever activity they're doing. The picture on the left, is kind of an example of what sensory break rooms look like in the US right now. They put a lot of different toys and lights and different things in a room for individuals to go and take that time. The problem is in the States is that right now they just put all of those things in there and place the kid in there and expect that they're going to be able to take that break with what they've given them. But it's important to realize that that's not necessarily effective because you have to individualize the sensory break to that person. Find out what they like, find out what they enjoy, find out what they need to self-regulate and provide that in the room or space. It doesn't have to be a fancy room. It could just be a toy or something that they like or a space for them to run in for them to take that sensory break. Uh-oh. I broke it. The computer needed a sensory break. Yeah. Yeah. This one here, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes, thank you. So the next intervention that we'd like to talk about is calendar systems. Calendar systems is a large umbrella term for calendars, schedules, but more importantly, anything that makes the environment predictable and creates a way for the individual to know what's going on now, what might happen next, and if there are any changes to the schedule that might happen. Increasing predictability in the environment is really important because like we discussed earlier, a lot of our individuals are dealing with high levels of anxiety, and they're also dealing with lots of multisensory impairment, which makes it difficult for them to get cues that we may take for granted in our environment about what's going on and what might be happening next. All of us carry around calendar systems and use them all the time. One very common one is often located in our phones. Another one that was provided to you in your conference packet is this schedule here. I know for me, coming to a conference, it's very anxiety-provoking when I don't know where I need to be, what time things are happening, when am I going to eat next. So even something as simple as this helps me know what's going on and prepare for what's coming ahead. And so creating a calendar system for individuals with charge that they can interact with and gain that information that they may not be able to do without the calendar system is very important. Again, this is a system that you have to individualize, and there are many ways to make it very simple all the way up to very complex. A very simple calendar system can look like something in the top right corner, just two baskets. One with an object that indicates what activity is going to happen, and the other is a finished box where the object goes when that activity is done. So if it's playtime and you put the favorite toy in the one box, they play with it, and then when that activity is done, they put it in the finished basket, and they know it's time to move on to the next activity. You can use pictures, you can use objects that they find meaningful. For example, you don't necessarily have to use a toy. You could use a spoon for when it's time to eat. Again, you need to individualize it to what that person needs. Then you can make it a little more complicated. You can use one calendar system for a whole activity. And you can use different pictures or objects or whatever that individual needs. You can use words if they can read them to do that. So an activity example might be washing your hands. So you have a picture for each step of the activity, and they know what order it's in, and they can even take them off after they've done each activity if you use Velcro or a stick, for example. You can then make it more complicated to show all of the activities in a week or in a month, whatever that child needs. Other benefits from using a calendar system is that it can help you with transitions or changes in the schedule. Where we live in the United States, we get a lot of snow, and so sometimes school is canceled. One way that they used at Jacob's house to show when it was a school day was canceled is they had an X to place over the picture for school. And they showed him, school's canceled today, we're putting the X over it. And it just shows them that, yes, this was on the schedule, this what was planned, but now we've had to change to that. I talked about how it reduces anxiety. Another thing is that calendar systems can be used to communicate. They can be used to talk about what's happening next. They can also be used to let the child or individual express what they would like. So if there's a break time during the day, you can offer them several pictures or objects to say, which one would you like to do during that time, and they can choose and have a say in what their schedule is going to look like. Lastly, I always like to mention that calendar systems aren't necessarily only for our individual with charge. They can be very helpful for everyone, caregivers, parents, teachers. If everyone's on the same schedule and know what's going on, it makes the environment more predictable, which makes it much better for our individuals with charge. The next intervention is social stories. Social stories are short, simple stories that you personalize or individualize to whatever activity or event or situation that you want to explain to your individual with charge. This could be something like teaching them how to share toys with others or teaching them how to wash their hands. The example that's here on the right is hard to read and also not translated. I'll read it quick to give you an idea of what it could look like. But the idea is to match words that you're reading repetitively to the child with pictures that they can see. At the top it says, when someone is hurting or annoying me, 1, I look at them. 2, I put my hand up in a stop sign. 3, I say to the person, stop it, I don't like it. And 4, if it doesn't work, I will get help from a teacher. So it's just one example of how these short stories can be used for all kinds of different situations to prepare the individual beforehand on what's going to happen and what they should do. And by putting it in a story format with pictures that might be interesting, that you're reading or signing or working through with them, you can prepare them for what might be happening next. The last intervention I'm going to talk about is experience books. Experience books are booklets that you can make after an event, after an activity, to help the individual remember what had happened and kind of experience that again. The idea is to use pictures from the actual event or even objects that you collect when you're doing the activity or that you get separately. For example, if you went to the park and you picked up certain leaves or you saw different sticks that you were picking up and gathering, you could place those in the book with words or pictures of you at the park to look at again with your child and see, this is what we did when we went to the park. It helps them consolidate that memory. It's something that they can feel and touch, and it's a useful way of talking about that event with your child after it happens. I'm going to pass over to Tim.
And those 3 interventions she just talked about are so useful. I mean, they do take a bit of time and thought, particularly the calendars, but really, really extremely helpful. I just can't tell you how much that's changed everything for Jacob. I'm going to talk about respecting communication. And I'll start, I guess, by talking about Jessica, and then I'll go back to the PowerPoint. But Jessica was a young girl with Charge syndrome who had many, many different kinds of issues going on, which the school didn't even recognize. One of them was pain. She had severe reflux, which was not discovered until probably 5 years after I had tried to help the school district with her behavior. But she was very aggressive, and she became aggressive when she was told to do something she didn't want to do, which is not terribly surprising. One of the things was that the school wanted her to stay sitting in her chair for longer periods of time than she wanted to sit in her chair. You know, schools and teachers are all about kids being in their seats and paying attention. But Jessica, after about 10 minutes, would say, I need to get out of my chair. And she would start to get out. Her intervener would push her back into her chair, and she'd try to get out, and they try to push her back in. She'd start hitting and scratching and kicking, and then be removed from the classroom. And they wanted to know what to do about these behaviors. And I thought, well, one of the things is I don't like the way that she's communicating she needs a break. She's communicating by hitting and scratching and kicking. So why don't we teach her a different way of saying, I need a break, please. It could be a sign, it could be a gesture, it could be something like that, or a card that she would just hand to them. And then when she did that, she'd get her break. And the response from I think it was the principal of the school was, well, then she'd just be manipulating us, right? She'd be getting to get out of her chair by using appropriate communication. And I said to them, what's more important, staying in the chair or learning to communicate? If she uses a card to say, I need a break now, and you say, no, you can't have one, that's pointing out the futility of saying, I need a break. We establish communication by respecting the communication. It's just like you don't give somebody a choice and not honor the choice that they make. I saw a video of a man working with a boy with Charge who was supposed to be their behavior expert, and he had a special classroom for the behaviorally challenged kids, and Michael was one of them. And it really was going badly from the very beginning, but Michael wanted to play on the computer, and his teacher wanted him to use flashcards to study sign vocabulary. So they'd show him a picture, and Michael was supposed to sign it. Michael kept going to the computer, and the teacher kept pulling him away from the computer. And they were getting a little bit of a tug of war going. And then the teacher said, okay, do the vocabulary, then the computer. So Michael went over, sat down, did the vocabulary, and then started to go back to the computer. Teacher said, no, we're going to do something else now. You can't give people choices and then not follow through. It's disrespectful, and it's telling him there's no point in cooperating, there's no point in communicating. So we have to, if we teach a person something they're supposed to do and we get their cooperation, we have to follow through with that. Too often, though, and the popular word today among psychologists, at least in the schools, but maybe everybody in the schools these days in the United States, is compliance. They want people to comply with demands. So if I tell a student to go sit down in their seat, the pupil's supposed to do that, and that seems to be what people want. And that fits the totalitarian direction the United States is going in these days, but I don't like it. I'm much more about cooperation. How can we have a classroom learning experience by cooperating with one another, right? So it's not building compliance, it's building communication, talking about what we mutually need in order for things to be successful. So I'm just it's so terribly important. I can't emphasize this enough, that if you want your child to communicate, you have to respect their forms of communication. Now, all behavior is communication, and some of that behavior is really terrible. But as we respond to it in ways that communicates our understanding, that begins to form that communication. Then when we ask them to change the way they're telling us what they need by using a sign or a symbol, then we have to absolutely respect it at that moment for it to become used. I mean, eventually down the road you can say, not now, sorry, but you can't do that at the beginning. If I want to teach Jacob to use a sign to say he wants a bath as opposed to pulling me to the bathtub, the example I gave yesterday, when he shows me that sign, I have to go do it, or I'm not establishing that form of communication. And I did this one yesterday. So, managing transitions. Life is full of transitions. We've been here for a few days. Turns out tomorrow we're all leaving. That's a transition, right? And sometimes it's yay, we get to go home. And sometimes it's, oh my gosh, what's awaiting for me at home, right? This has been kind of a nice break from all of that. But it's a transition. We transition from listening to this talk to dinner and what's going to be happening with that. Our children are transitioning from preschool programs into kindergarten, into elementary, into middle school, if you have that, into the high school. And each one of those transitions is extremely difficult. You know, our kids like sameness, and we're implementing change with every transition. So managing these things is key to success and with our child's behaviors, our child's anxiety, our child's learning. We can't just let it happen without some thought. So one of the parent who was here for the professional day but couldn't stay, but she talked to us about transitioning from 3 years in a preschool, moving into a kindergarten, and she'd be changing her teacher, changing the intervener, changing the school building. How do I manage all of that? And I'm really so glad that she's thinking about it, because there are ways to manage it. You certainly want the people in the new environment to know what worked in the previous environment. So getting the new school people to come and observe where she is now, or he is now, be very, very helpful. Having maybe the intervener that's working with him now train the new people on some of the things that they do. Providing information to the team about who Lucas is so that they would know a bit of what to expect. I mean, all these things are ways of managing it. When my son moved from 6th grade elementary school to the big junior high school for 7th and 8th, where all the elementary school students from around the town would end up going, the members of his circle of friends that Nancy mentioned briefly, well, you guys weren't here maybe for that part, but his circle of friends is an organized group of, you organize a group of friends basically. Would you be willing to be his friend? Would you be willing? Would you be willing? And they meet and talk about how they can facilitate this kid's life. They went with Jacob to each of the other elementary schools to meet with the other 6th grade students to tell them, this is Jacob, he's our friend, he's coming to school with us. And that was a magnificent way that they thought of themselves to manage his transition. So, other things to do for your child to manage transitions: visual and auditory cues, telling them something's going to change. Sometimes it's as simple as, we've been watching television, but now we're going to go have dinner. That's a transition. Do we have a cue to tell them about that? The calendar systems that Shanti was just talking about. Explicit teaching, tell them this is how you do it. You put down your book, you stand up, you walk over here. I mean, there are lots of ways that you can do that. Reminders, don't just, David and I observed a kid in California who went to school early and sat in another room watching TV until it was time for school to start in a different room. You couldn't just say, Alexa, we're going to move now from watching TV to school. You had to give her 10-minute warning, 5-minute warning, 2-minute warning for her to be able to manage that transition. Social stories are a good way as well. And, you know, for this particular girl, on that Monday, she was supposed to go to Walmart at 10 o'clock. It was a Thursday, actually, at 10 o'clock. But they wanted her to stay in her classroom for the whole morning so David and I could be observing her. So the parents wrote a social story. You know, Alexa on Thursdays goes to Walmart, but Dr. Tim is coming to visit Alexa, or Lexus, it was Lexus. And so on this Thursday, when it comes time to go to Walmart, Lexus is going to stay in their classroom so Dr. Tim can see her. They read that to her every day for a week. We got to that Thursday, we're all holding our breath. 10 o'clock comes. Okay, those people going to Walmart, get up and get ready to go to the bus. Alexis just sat there, worked on her math assignment or whatever. It really helped with that change in her schedule. And of course, visiting, exploring new settings. So think about all the different transitions that occur, and you've got a big one coming up tomorrow as you return to your homes. So I'm going to turn it back to David to talk about environmental kinds of issues.
I'll make a few general points first. Because Shanti has finished, I didn't want to say this when you still had to present, but I just want to commend Shanti because she is a student, and I think she presents at exactly the same level as me and Tim. I think it's quite extraordinary. When I was a student, when I was her age, I didn't even know what day it was most of the time. And I could never make a presentation. And she's wonderful to work with. She thinks very clearly. And her presentation style is so much better than ours. She never mangles her words. And I think it's fantastic to have somebody so young and so smart coming into Charge Syndrome. And Tim's the man more than anybody else in the world who's bringing young people into Charge Land, and that is really important because we're getting very old. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you. The ideas we're sharing with you come from the world of deafblindness, classic deafblind educational strategies. We're not telling you all of them. We're picking the ones we thought were the most important and the most helpful. And we're just saying them very quickly. Secondly, we're not saying that every one of you has a child who's going to have big behavior problems or is going to need all these strategies. The important thing is to know about possibilities and to individualize the way you work with the child and the way school works with your child. So we don't want anyone to go away thinking, oh my God, my child is going to bite people, so we have to use social stories. I mean, if you're lucky, they won't bite people. And I would say children who don't have charge bite people as well. It's very important to remember that. And the last general point, once you have charge, you always have charge. It doesn't get better and it doesn't go away. And the kinds of difficulties we've been talking about are probably always there. Listening to the young adults this morning was wonderful, but Josephine made a point about balance problems and difficulties with walking. And then she said, it isn't a problem anymore. And then she thought, and she said, well, as long as the weather's not too warm, it's not a problem. And I thought, yes, absolutely. She has to think about walking all the time. It doesn't show. She walks very well, very normally, but she's not walking easily like we do. She's still, part of her brain is still having to plan and think about what she's doing. And it's good to remember that, and you can develop very well and be an adult, and suddenly something related to charge will cause problems and make things go wrong. And it's so important not to say, oh, she's very lazy, which is the favorite explanation. It's more popular than autism even, lazy. Or she's very spoiled, or she's being really difficult, or she's trying to get attention. It's quite likely that what's gone wrong is beyond the person's control. I just wanted to say that in case you're getting the wrong impression. So, I'm not going to do all of this because we have little time, and we'd like some time for questions, if you have questions. But one of the ways, if there's a problem with a child, very often people look to the child and they think, what can we do to the child? Or what can we do with the child to make this better? And sometimes you don't have to do anything to the child. If you're lucky, you can change the situation. You can change the environment and produce very extreme changes in the child's behavior for the better or for the worse, depending on the way the environment changes. But a lot of my job as an advisory teacher going into a school was to look for ways that maybe the teacher could change the classroom environment to make it more supportive for the child. And if it's good for the child with charge, it will be good for every child in the room. That's an important point. You know, the ideas we're promoting are good for all children. If every child who's ever born had good deafblind education, they'd be better people. They really would. But that would take a lot of work and a lot of effort. So, thinking about the environment, there are three things in the environment that we need to think about. People, time, and space, or the physical environment. And this is going to be so quick. And I always worry about the next slide, because it's impossible. But ideally, your child needs people who fit all these descriptions. And now I have to try and read what it says. Limited in number. Certainly when the child is younger, less people is usually better than more people, because those people need to build a relationship, and it's within the relationship that the child can be taught and helped to develop. It's very difficult to come along as a stranger with younger children and really establish a relationship very quickly, unless, like me, you're very old and very experienced and you have ideas about what children like. And yesterday, Sir Henry was here he's not here today, he was giving a wonderful demonstration of a child exploring and moving, and one of Tim's students, Lily, ended up with him and took him up on her lap and did rhythmic movement episodes. And the relationship grew and grew and grew. And you could see how much he was bonding with Lily and how much Lily was bonding with Henry. It was just a small episode, but it demonstrated that there are ways you can build a relationship, maybe quite quickly, but generally speaking, those relationships take time and you have to work at them. And relationship building is one of the basic requirements in the early curriculum for these children. It's the responsibility of the adults, not of the child, like so many things. The people have to be available, they need to be responsive. In other words, you don't want them only being directive. They're not there just to tell the child what to do or to make them do things. And that's been a theme of the whole day today, that really the children need to know that they have some control. They need to be able to manipulate us, because that's what communication is for, amongst other things. And being responsive is the key to relationship building. You know, when you hold a new baby, you don't just make the baby do things. You respond to the baby smile, the baby sound. When the baby gets upset, you do things to stop it being upset. You don't say to the baby, stop crying because you're trying to manipulate me. But you say that to older children when they do things. You know, we have to step back if possible and think about what we're doing here. And I'll just go towards the end. It's important for the people to be experienced observers, because you can't be responsive to the child if you're not paying attention to the child and observing. And I think it's good to have a way of identifying yourself, especially if the child doesn't see very well and doesn't hear very well. And this is my opportunity to mention the idea of the intervener, which is the word we use in English for a person, an adult, who works with the child one-on-one. And their only job is to work with the child with Charge syndrome in the school, usually in the school situation. And we did a day observing Claudia's son on Tuesday, fortunately in a really good program, so we didn't have to be ultra diplomatic. But he has an intervener who's worked with him quite some time, who was really, really fantastic. And she demonstrated the perfect way of giving that support to a child like Jonas. They have an intensely good, positive relationship. She was available and there all the time. She was observing, looking and listening all the time, but she only intervened when it was necessary, when Jonas asked for help, or when she felt he hadn't totally understood what the teacher was saying, and she needed to help him get the idea. And the intervener is now becoming increasingly popular as an idea in the United States and in the United Kingdom, where I come from. Timing is important. And again, I look at you and you're demonstrating that timing matters. Though I must say, some of you are looking very alert. A few of you are looking very alert. And I think that's probably because the end is coming. And you know that in less than 10 minutes, you will be free to go. But timing and pacing is crucially important in teaching. And it has to be individualized. Things have to be at the child's pace, not at ours. And it's easy to assume that means everything has to be slow because the child has Charge syndrome. But you probably know sometimes, for some children with Charge, the pacing has to be very quick. Because if it's too slow, they get very bored or they get frustrated. So it isn't just about going slowly, but it's about getting it right for the child. And that comes from observing and being responsive to them. Space, there isn't time to talk much about this, but there's lots of literature, certainly in English, if you explore deaf-blind strategies on the internet, lots of literature about things like adapting the environment. And I know, for example, in the Netherlands, they've done a lot of work for a long time looking at reactive environments and environments that encourage and support children's learning, that help with hearing, that help with vision, and so on. And now I've lost where I am. Yes, remember that the child's behaviors can indicate what's wrong with the environment. If you look at the child's behavior and you're concerned about it, you might want to think about the environment first and say, could this be causing the problem? Can we change the environment? And I told a story yesterday. I went into a school in California. The little child with Charge was sitting facing a big window with lots of sunshine next to the air conditioning unit, which was blowing air and making a lot of noise. The child had hearing aids, and she was very distressed. She wasn't happy. And in the break, I said to the teacher, I wonder if we can move her. We turn her back to the window, away from the sun, and can we move her across the room away from the air conditioning unit? And we did that, and we got a completely different child. Now, it doesn't always work, but on that particular day, they all absolutely adored me because I seemed like a complete genius. But of course, I was paid to go in and just look at this child. I had no other responsibility. So it was a good classroom with a good teacher, but there were many, many other things the teacher had to be thinking about. And it was helpful to have me come in and say, I think I see the problem here. I wish it was always that easy, but it isn't always. But surprisingly often, by changing the environment, you can improve the situation for children. You need to minimize distractions, and for children with charge, distractions can be very different to what they are for us. Moving air can be a major distraction, where for us, we get used to it and we cope. Some noise from the heater or the air conditioner can be a big problem, where we are able to ignore it and focus on other things. And then positioning. Because of these physical postural difficulties, you have to get the positioning right. This is bad positioning for young children with charge. The feet just flying in space creates an intense feeling of physical insecurity. And what this child needs is a step or something for the feet to rest on. You can explore the right seat or the right chair for the child, but sometimes other positions are better. Sometimes sitting on a chair is not good for too long, and sometimes standing helps them to work and to see and to listen better, and sometimes kneeling may help those things. And again, you have to experiment and you have to see what works and what doesn't work best. And it's good to be very open-minded and very creative about it. Minimize distractions, and to stay on positioning, remember that physical positions and support, physical support, can often be the key to getting the child's attention, keeping them comfortable, and getting them to function at their best. And that might mean crossing the legs, it might mean laying on their back, it might mean planking. I mean, for us, it's illogical. If you want to look at the iPad, planking between the coffee table and the couch is not the obvious position, certainly for me. I would never do this. But for her and many other children, for a long time, this is a really good way to concentrate and use the vision. And if the child is young, usually the best way to work on functional vision skills is with the child flat on their back or leaning back, rather than always bringing them up and saying, you must be up, you must be up. We're using vision, so you must be up. Maybe they must be down to use their vision. And then one day you can use that vision to get them up, but it has to be done in the right way. That was a rush. And now I'm handing back to Tim for one last comment, and then you're free.
It's a long comment. Settle down. It's an important comment, I think. Managing the environment to prevent behavior problems, and that's really what Dave is talking about. When you can get the kid stabilized, if you can provide the opportunity to do the kinds of strange positions and postures that they want, like hanging upside down or planking, recognize these are things that they do for a reason. But in terms of managing the environment overall, consider what you could do to make the environment of your child safe and secure to enable their optimal development and avoid challenging behaviors. Our kids want to feel safe and secure. So I've got these 4 different principles, and I was trying to think of an acronym, so I think this is FIRM. That'll work. Familiar. How can you create an environment that feels safe and secure for the child because it's familiar to them? And that's where having things be regular, having things be organized, having things be sequential in ways that they understand and can predict, having your house organized in a kind of way that stays pretty much the same so they can know when they go into their home, now I am safe, now I am secure. How do you make it regular? Create an environment that is predictable to the child. We have a calendar system. We have the child make choices about what's going to happen, but generally things follow a pattern. They will feel more safe and secure. Responsive. How can you create an environment that anticipates and responds to the behavior of your child? It's much better to have an idea of how to respond to the behavior and be consistent in the response than to constantly be inconsistent or uncertain. One of my friends used to talk about making your parenting errors with courage, right? Because we do make parenting errors all the time, but do it with courage because we do the best that we can. And then trying to meet the basic needs. How can you create an environment that anticipates and responds to the needs of the child? Of course, figuring out what those needs are is not always easy, and it's confusing to us. But the more you can put yourself in your child's place, the more you can ask yourself, I wonder why they would have chosen this behavior. That's what will help you get a sense of what their needs might be. And for each of those questions, consider the problems of people, time, and space, and who's there, how the time is utilized, and how the space can facilitate or hinder development. That will help. And sensory impairments are a huge issue in this, and our kids are definitely multiply sensory impaired. And, with charge, it's not just ears and eyes, it's nose, it's taste, it's vestibular, it's touch, it's proprioceptive, it's all the senses. And they're trying to make sense out of all of these and utilize them and have their brain make sense out of it and utilize them. It's not an easy task. So the more we can do to create environments that are safe and secure, the better the child will do. We do have some resources here that may be useful to you. There are probably others that we could come up with as well. If you have any difficulty in finding these resources, don't hesitate to contact me, contact David, contact Shanti. Claudia can always get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to provide you with copies, electronic copies of almost all of the stuff we can just send you. So don't hesitate to do that. Thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy dinner.
Vielen Dank. Gibt es Fragen?
Thank you so much. Do we have any
No more
questions?
questions? No. They're tired. Gut, sagen Sie. Ja, vielen Dank fürs Zuhören.
Well,
Vielen
thank you
Dank.
for listening. Thank you to Tim and David and Shanti. As of 6 o'clock, we will have dinner, and then we will have the soccer game later on here. I don't know exactly at what time. At what, 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock. So we will be able to watch the game together at 8 o'clock and enjoy the rest of your evening. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to start at 9:15, where our young people have prepared something. I don't know exactly what. It'll be a surprise for all of us. It'll be here in this room at 9:15, 9:15.